Now for something completely different. This is short course off-road truck racing at the Crandon World Cup. There's a huge crowd on hand here as they wrap up the 50th edition of this race with the final race of this 4-day Labor Day weekend extravaganza. They call it the Good Old Boys race. All I know is they've got old cars and they play the Dukes of Hazzard theme song. Sign me up. Now this giant crowd is here for what is considered the Super Bowl or the Indy 500 or the Daytona 500 of short course off-road racing. Why Crandon, Wisconsin? Well, it's really kind of hard to describe. Off-road racing has always been a regionalized sport. Just think of the terrain. Racing in the desert of Baja or racing in the forest of Wisconsin or anywhere all the way back to the East Coast is totally different. So off-road racing, it's always been difficult to determine who is really the best of the best. And what's cool about Crandon is for the majority of its time, it's been the one track that has remained relatively agnostic. There have been some years where the West Coast drivers stayed away and it was really an event just for the local stars. But for a long, long time, this race has been recognized as the one that everyone wants to win. And because of that, this ginormous crowd shows up. It's a lot of people. They think maybe 60, 70,000 here. They usually get 50, but the 50th anniversary makes it that much bigger and better. So since I was here already to do some TV work for this race, why not throw a Weege show together? I have no idea if Race Tech even wants to sponsor this. Yeah, you know the Weege show. Are you down with the Weege show? Yeah, right on. They still recognize me even in off-road races, they being a very small group. I don't know if Race Tech has anything to do with this. They don't build off-road truck suspension, but if your motorcycle suspension, you want it to be plusher and have better bottoming resistance and more traction, just dial in Race Tech. They can do nothing for those cars out there. Anyhow, look, all racing to some degree, when you start introducing money and it gets really serious, gets political to some degree. So it's also made it difficult in off-road racing and really any kind of racing to try to take the best drivers and machines from one type of series and compare to another. It's a never-ending argument. Are NASCAR drivers better than F1 drivers? What about IndyCar drivers? What about rally car drivers? What about drift car drivers? And then what about off-road drivers? Is the guy that's the best at racing in the desert actually the best off-road truck race driver? Back in the day, we used to have a stadium series with Mickey Thompson. Those guys were great. And what about short course off-road? What's up, gang? This race attempts to bridge all those gaps. It takes the best of the West and the best of the East. Shout out to the legend Walker Evans. Even if you're a motocross fan, you probably heard of Walker. He decided in the late 1980s to come out here from California. He recognized this race as one he really wanted to win. He went up against the legendary Jack Flannery, who's kind of the best of this region. And as those two started to lock horns, and then ESPN put the race on television, the world started to see Crandon as the place for the ultimate showdown. Now this race started with humble roots, based on that east-west kind of thing. In the late 1960s, the original Baja 1000, they called it the Mexican 1000 back then, inspired folks here to say, well, what if we had an off-road race through the woods instead of through the desert? They called it the Brush Run 101, 4 25-plus mile laps through these forests. They started it in 1970. By the 1980s, they had kind of outgrown the idea of taking all these vehicles through the woods and built an off-road racetrack, this one, with a lot of these cars probably out there. And then again, by the late 80s, it had really established itself as the big house. Now, through the years, truck regulations and sponsorships and all these different things have changed. And there were some years, they said at Crandon, where they weren't getting the best of the West, but they got them now. And that's what leads to great racing. And for you motocross fans, that includes some people that you know. Jeremy McGrath, you know he's Southern California based. He was racing full-time in off-road trucks for a long time. He's actually starting to back down that part of his career, but he had Crandon on his list. He came out here and raced. MC, solid third in the big World Championship Cup race. Well done, MC. Brian Deegan, you know he's a great driver and certainly a big name, but also Haley Deegan, his daughter, who a lot of people think might be the one that saves NASCAR. She was here, not racing in NASCAR, but racing a short course off-road truck. All these folks from California coming because they felt that Crandon is the place to be in front of this giant crowd. Now, it's very difficult to take trucks from different series that have different regulations. One of the cool things about this race is that they take four-wheel drive trucks that are faster because they have more traction, and two-wheel drive trucks which are slower. And in our final cup race, they give the two-wheel drive trucks a head start They try to time it so that the four-wheel drive trucks will make up that time by the time the white flag comes out, and then they can battle it out. It actually worked beautifully like that in this race, where Keegan Kincaid, a local product in the two-wheel drive machine, led the entire way over McGrath. But then late in the race, the four-wheel drive machine of RJ Anderson was able to catch them, make the moves in the last lap, and win. First ever win for him. This is a cool story. His dad was the race engineer for Walker Evans back in the day. RJ made his name in a Polaris Razor doing YouTube videos, and then eventually was able to get in an off-road race truck, get sponsored, and do this kind of stuff. So it was a great story through and through. Walker, at 80 years old, was here to help celebrate the victory. A lot of the big favorites got crashed and there was carnage because it was the 50th and everyone wanted to win so badly. Most people thinking that this was maybe the deepest field and the most intense racing they'd ever seen, and also just a big count. A lot of trucks on the line, which meant it was really hard to get through the first couple of laps clean, so that took out a lot of contenders. It led to phenomenal racing, and RJ Anderson gets the win. But what I think is the coolest thing about it is we had peace amongst everyone for one weekend. Yes, there's East and West, and that's gonna lead to a little bit of heat. There's the Greaves family. These trucks, they're the best of the East for the most part. They usually win the championships locally. But everybody got along. The East and the West, they crashed each other, they ran each other hard. There were some, you know, ruffled feathers, but as they would say, they didn't wreck each other, they just rattled some cages, and everybody was able to get along and really settle it. What I realized coming to a big race like this is they're actually pretty lucky on the motocross side. Compared to most motorsports, yeah, you like the Weege show? Yeah, right on. This is really fun. Yeah, Pulpamex is terrible.
Pulpamex is great.
Oh gosh, they have bad taste here. They have bad taste here. In motocross, we're pretty lucky. All of these things that most motorsports wrestle, different regions, or even international, you know, again, that F1 NASCAR comparison of who's really best, we're actually pretty lucky. Yes, there are two established series. There's the MXGP series in Europe, and there's racing in the United States. Those are generally considered the two top ones. It just gives you an idea of the kind of damage by the way these trucks go through. They're wrenching. Yes, there's two different series, but look, motocross and supercross, a unique sport where someone like Ken Roxon can come over here and compete, and they're on relatively equal footing. We have a Motocross of Nations coming up. That's going to be the hot topic in motocross over the course of this month of September. And although maybe the playing field isn't exactly equal, it's a whole lot more equal than most motorsports are able to do. There's no way you could ever have Jimmy Johnson and Lewis Hamilton race cars and say that neither one has an advantage. One direction or the other, someone's going to be more suited to whatever type of track or equipment they use. We're relatively agnostic, as I would say in motocross terms. Racing is the same all around the world, the equipment is the same all around the world, and the general riding techniques are the same all around the world. Also, as I've been talking about with the last couple of these Weege shows, motocross is still relatively inexpensive. When you talk to these drivers and these teams, the number one thing they talk about is trying to find enough sponsorship money and hustle to try to offset the unbelievable cost of buying one of these trucks and maintaining one of these trucks. I'm just going to give you an idea. Some of the race engines, these folks tell me, be 70 or 80 grand for a race engine. You better bring 3 to the races because you could blow up 2 in a weekend real easy. Transmissions, tens of thousands of dollars. Rear ends, tens of thousands of dollars. The shocks are ridiculous on these machines. So racing's expensive. This sport is fairly big, but it's never gotten as big as people hoped. So there's not NASCAR level sponsorship money here. So everybody has to hustle. The drivers, they don't fly in and drive like a motocross rider does. They've got to work like literally on the truck all weekend, and then they got to get on the gun and the horn and try to get sponsorship. This is very big, this is very exciting, but the budgets are very, very high, and there aren't a lot of factory rides in this deal as well. So this is an awesome event. It was really fun. Pavardi, good job, man. That's your Pro Light champ, Christopher Pavardi. There's the trophies. So this is a great event. It was super fun. It was awesome. They even had a big Kid Rock concert on Friday night. They actually absolutely packed the house. So all these things are great, but there are many great things that we can point at in the sport we follow, which is motocross. And that's as expensive as it has gotten. It's still low budget enough for people around the world to be able to compete at a fairly high level. You don't really have to retire because you can't find $250,000 to go racing each year. We have factory deals. The riders are able to be superstars and concentrate on their craft. They don't have to be the mechanic, the crew chief, and the rider for the weekend. And although I wouldn't say the economy of the sport is at its absolute best, it's still healthy enough where there's a good solid model. And as you go through these pits, you will hear occasional references to, ooh man, it was awesome. It was kind of like motocross. It felt kind of like Supercross when they talk about the big crowds or the sponsorship or the interest or the hype in this race. It's good to know that motocross and Supercross in a motorsport sense is still one of the most highly respected. Maybe it's not as big as NASCAR. Maybe it's not as big as F1. Well, there's no maybe, it's not. But a lot of these folks still look at motocross as the influencer. That's what they wish they could be. This is a whole lot safer. You can do it at a little bit older age. That certainly helps. But overall, just a really good time when you come to the off-road truck races. And the financials, the sponsorship, that's for the drivers to figure out. And somehow they do. They brought their trucks here. They were equally matched enough to put on great racing. I want to continue the theme of agnosticness. It was actually Red Bull that brought me out here, but a Rockstar truck won, the Monster, energy back trucks went very fast. Everybody was in it together this weekend. It's something that all motorsports wish they had a little more often, and it's something that we get to see in our two-wheel sport often enough to enjoy it. One more time, a shout out to this guy. That's showtime right there. That's where Jeremy McGrath does his work now. Solid performance for the number 2, who got 3rd overall, representing the two-wheel folks. We're gonna let them celebrate along with everybody else. 50 years of racing at Crandon. Don't worry about all the downsides and how much money they all spent tearing up their trucks. They all had fun, and that's what all motorsports are really about. We'll just settle out the details later on. Thanks for watching.